Hello everyone, greetings to one and all. In today's session, I'm going to show you the demo on the classical reports. In our previous episode, I have explained to you the significance of the events in both classical reports and in module pool reports. In today's session, we are going to understand the flow of the reports, the events in the reports, which event is called first and when they are called, what is the significance of each event. I'm going to explain everything in detail through a demo program. So the classical events flow, this is the flow of how the events gets called during your execution. So the load of program will be the first event, initialization is the next event, at selection screen output is next, at selection screen is next, and start of selection and end of selection. But there is some toggling between these events. It's that doesn't mean that once the control of the program has come past at selection screen output, it doesn't mean that it will never call it again. It will still call it back based upon the scenario. In this demo, I'm going to explain this exact scenarios where each of the events can be called back. So this is the same explanation that I've given in my previous episode. If for detailed explanation on each of these events, you can follow my previous episode and let's jump onto the demo now. So this is a simple program that I've created. So in this program, I have the events declared in the flow logic include. So here I have almost all the events. I have selection screen. I have load of program, initialization, at selection screen output, at selection screen, start of selection, and end of selection. Okay. I have written this code in load of program just to let you know that this load of program is one event that gets triggered implicitly, right? Even if I don't write this load of program event, still this load of program gets triggered implicitly. But to explicitly show you this event is triggered, I have written this event. Okay, now let me just execute. I click on the execute option here. So as I told you before, the first event that gets loaded is load of program. Before I proceed further, I hope you all are aware of the debugging tool and how to use the debugger features that are available. In case if you are new to the debugging, I request you to go through my debugger series, go through all the videos to understand the importance and significance of debugging and how to use the debugging tool. Let's proceed. So I'll be only using the F8 button, the continue button, so that I can quickly go through the different concepts of the events. So the first, as you see, the load of program is the first event that's get called. I click on F8 again. So it is moving on to the initialization event. So the load of program, as I told you in the previous episode, it loads the program, and then the initialization event. This event instantiates the local classes. Here there is a local class, and I'm using this event to instantiate the local class. In the next F8, it goes to at selection screen output. Why does it go to at selection screen output? Because in the next step, the screen is going to be prepared for you and it is going to be displayed. Now, for example, I click on F8 here. You see, I'm getting displayed with the screen. So whenever my selection screen is getting displayed, the immediate previous event would be at selection screen output. Okay. Now imagine I don't enter any input or I enter any, it's both are same. Even if I enter any input, okay, or if I don't enter any input, the next event that gets going to be triggered is at selection screen, because my enter command triggers a command to the system program to validate the data in the selection screen. Now I press enter. Okay, you see at selection screen is triggered. But now again when I press continue F8, again that selection screen output screen will event will be triggered. Why? Because by pressing enter on my selection screen, I'm expecting two things. One is my data on the selection screen to be validated. Next, my selection screen should be displayed again because I have not executed F8 to proceed further. I am just validating the data in my selection screen. So the first step, my data is getting validated through that selection screen event. After that, the same selection screen is going to be displayed. What did I tell you? When the selection screen is about to be displayed, what will be the immediate previous event? It's going to be at selection screen output again. So that's the reason the command control goes to at selection screen output. Now I press F8, my selection screen is displayed. Okay, now consider I don't give any input here and I press enter. Still again my at selection screen will be displayed because it is validating the input. Again when I press F8, it will go to at selection screen output because it's still going to display my selection screen. Okay, I'm pressing F8 again. Now it doesn't stop here. Even for any code change, even for any screen element changes. For example, I'm clicking on this radio button. This will again trigger my at selection screen because I have done a screen change here. Okay. And when a screen change is done, again I'm commanding the system program to trigger or to validate the data in my selection screen, because any change on the screen elements automatically triggers both my at selection screen event first, and then when I execute, my at selection screen output event will be triggered because it is going to display the selection screen again. Any event that I do, like as far as the checkbox is concerned, it is just a screen element which does not work on any user command. Whereas this radio button, I have written a program code inside that needs to work on user command. That's the reason when I check the checkbox, nothing happens. Rather, when I change the radio button, the event gets triggered. Now, for example, see here, this is the selection screen that is validating my input. Now it is going inside my at selection screen output. Now I'll show you why this event gets triggered when radio button is selected. Okay. Now here is where I have defined my radio button. If you see here in the definition of my radio button, I have given the user command during the declaration. So whenever a user action is happening on this radio button, I expect some code logic to be triggered. So henceforth, your debugger screen is triggered because I have placed the breakpoint, and henceforth your events are triggered accordingly. Okay. Now I will click on execute. My load of program is executed first. Then initialization is executed next. My at selection screen output is next because my selection screen is going to get displayed. Now consider I'm inputting some event and I directly execute. Now, my at selection screen will be triggered because it is validating my data. And as a next event, my at selection screen output will never be triggered because the consequence of my action is going to display me the result, but not the selection screen. Only when the action ends in displaying the selection screen again, my at selection screen output will be triggered. Else, the flow just continues. What is the next event? It is the start of selection again, where it fetches the data, and it goes to the end of selection where it displays the data. That's it. This is the data that we are getting displayed. Now imagine what happens when we go back. Now when I go back, again my load of program event gets triggered first, okay, and then my initialization event gets triggered next, and then my selection screen is going to get displayed. So at selection screen output is triggered, right? So whenever at selection screen output event is triggered, you can conclude the next step is the selection screen is going to get displayed. That's it. So this is how you understand the flow of events, friends. So there are several events in the classical reports, but I'm discussing about only the key events that will be predominantly used on many of the programs. Okay, so there is going to be some toggling between the events, but when an event is called and how we should control our program flow, how we should write the code logic, it all depends upon our conceptual understanding of these events. Okay, it's very significant, it's very critical that we understand the flow of the events for us to write appropriate logic in our programs that we develop, right? So as I told you before, all these events, they get called in a separate sequence: load of program first, initialization next, at selection screen output, at selection screen, start of selection, end of selection. However, based upon the user action, there will be a toggling between the events in between. Okay, so what are all the events that gets triggered before a selection screen? Load of program, initialization, at selection screen output. What is the event that gets triggered during a validation on the screen? At selection screen and at selection screen output. What are the events that gets triggered when you execute from the selection screen for results? At selection screen, start of selection, and end of selection. So similarly, when you come back to the selection screen, again load of program gets triggered, initialization gets triggered next, and at selection screen output will come next. Now I can also choose to ignore this particular event, okay, and I can activate it. So I have to replace my breakpoints again, okay. So let me replace my breakpoints here. So without the load of program, still my program gets executed. Okay. 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 Just forget about the breakpoints that you see. I just place breakpoints on all the events here. Now I execute. You see my load of program is never called because I never placed one. My initialization program is the first that gets called. Okay. And then my at selection screen output, and then my selection screen gets displayed. Now imagine I don't write this event as well. I comment this code as well. Okay. Or let the code be, I'll comment this event. Okay. And I'll execute. You see, we are getting a statement, we are getting an error that this statement is not accessible because it is not belonging to any of the event because it is lying before the start of selection. If at all I want to write, if at all I pull this code here from initialization to here, okay, and let me try to activate, my program gets activated because though I don't I have categorized it under an event called start of selection, but the code is going to dump because my initial local class initialization happens here, and any event that gets any code that calls the local methods will get dumped because my class local class is not yet initiated. 2 points I'm trying to convey here. One, you cannot have an open statement without routing it to any event, just like I did. Like you cannot have a code directly without routing it in any, without pinning it to any event. You cannot have that. If at all you need to have something, you need to have the code after start of selection. Okay, because as I told you, start of selection is your implicit event that gets called when none of the events are declared. Okay, now when I uncomment this particular initialization event and I activate, it will be clearly activated. Okay, so I hope you understand the significance of each of the event, right? And this will help you in your programming concepts. So in my next video, I'll come up with more key technical concepts that's going to be useful for your HANA and ABAP developer lifecycle. Peace and blessings to everyone. Thank you one and all.